play is jumping into the I don't know, because real play is not outcome oriented. Play is jumping into I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know how this is going to end, and I don't know exactly how I'm going to feel.
We are learning to trust the ever-evolving rhythms of nature.
We are committed to embracing our shadow within community
and reclaiming our sovereignty.
We do this together.
That is the way.
Welcome to the Elemental Movement Podcast. I'm Dr. Matt Matucci, and I have Elden here with me too. And we are talking with a dear friend of mine today, Kyle Fincham. How's it going, Kyle?
Very nice. Very nice. Excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming today. So yeah, I felt really inspired to have you join us on this podcast because, we've known each other for probably 6 years now, thereabouts. And I've evolved a lot in that time. And I've also watched you evolve a lot in that time. And in your evolution, it's been really cool to be an observer of it and to see where you've gone with things. And your project, Infinite Play, has been something that I've really been, sitting back and watching and cheering you on with it. So yeah, I really was excited to hop on a call and talk to you about that, talk to you about how you think about all sorts of different things. So thanks for being here. I guess
super excited to be here.
Yeah, where I wanted to start with this though is what brought you to Infinite Play? I guess better question, what is Infinite Play?
Infinite Play is a movement exploration of the mindset of playfulness, right? Which is to welcome surprise. And the kind of playfulness that I'm interested in, and maybe what I imagine most playfulness really being, is a play in which we're trying to keep the play going rather than trying to end the play or win the play. So that would be my elevator pitch for what Infinite Play is. And to maybe go a little step further into what you were saying, like, how did I come to Infinite Play? Like, I can go into like a longer story or anything, but I'm happy to also just say that, like, I read at one point, and I've never read meditations, I will say that. But I did read somewhere at one point that it was actually never meant to be printed meditations, that it was actually his journal, and that it just belonged being printed because, like, the things that he was writing in his journal felt like it belonged for people to read. But it's actually just the advice he was giving himself, which is probably what a lot of like artists and poets and things are doing, is they're like presenting the advice that they've been giving themselves. So I think that Infinite Play in a lot of ways is really just the advice that I've been trying to give myself, and that I continue to give myself over time. In a place that's deeply competitive, and a place that celebrates perfection and winning and control in these things. And I was like, I need to address this in my own life, and it became like something that I ended up presenting.
That's rad, man. Thank you.
Kyle, before we jumped on, and this feels like it's probably connected in my own mind, having just met you, but right before we started recording, you were saying how you're very comfortable saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you could tie that into play.
Play is jumping into the I don't know, because real play is not outcome oriented. Play is jumping into I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know how this is going to end, and I don't know exactly how I'm going to feel. So that's kind of like the all-encompassing surprise is to jump into I don't know, and to also hold space for Infinite Play as like a facilitator, is to be willing to like jump into an I don't know as well. So yeah, it's the practice of I don't know, which is life, I would say.
Well, unfortunately, not a lot of people's lives in some capacity. At least they'd like to think that. Right.
Yeah, only to be quite surprised, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So with that, this is driving curiosity for me. So you're facilitating exploration of I don't know and surprise through movement practice.
Mhm.
And I'm really curious how like people are showing up to this. Like, what are you experiencing in those containers as you're, and what are people experiencing in these containers as they're exploring this? Because it's such a different archetypal expression of anything from what I perceive to be the norm.
Man, it's like it's everything. Because I think that people hear play, right? I would also say, hey, this is a really good question. Um, so thanks. People often conflate playfulness and joyfulness, right? And think that like play is always something joyful, but like you can go into the I don't know of everything. You can go into the I don't know of heartbreak and sadness and grief and sorrow, and you can go into the I don't know of excitement and joy and happiness and elation. And I would say that, and be surprised by all of them, and dance with all of those things. And I think that without being able to nail down exactly why, that like playing and having that kind of permission in a certain container creates a lot of space for a little bit of everything to like emerge. And for some people, it's like, oh my God, this was so much fun. And then for some people, there's like real heartbreak. There's like grief, like, oh my God, like, for example, I haven't been with people in this way for the majority of my life. Like where was this? Where was that? Where was that kind of interaction? Or or despair or anger for like how they've had to wear some sort of story of competition and exist in that way throughout their entire life. All that to say is like in that space I've witnessed kind of the full spectrum of like experiences of and emotions, and I've had to learn to welcome all of them. Like my capacity wasn't huge in the beginning. So like, for example, like when I started doing it, like, I mean, it's really I mean, it's a controlled accident, like what infinite play is. It wasn't like I walked in and was like, I am going to hold this giant and exciting container for people to show up and play and like have some sort of experience that's whatever they need. And like, I'm prepared for all of it. It used to be like, oh my God, like someone's crying here. Like, what do I do? Like, only to realize that like you treat it the same way as the laughter. It's like everybody's allowed to have the full thing, and everything, no thing is better or worse than the other, and be there for it. But yeah, there's been definitely a learning experience in that, and it brings about a lot. And I could only compare it in some ways to experiences that I've had in like maybe like group therapy, or like maybe like ceremonial settings, like where it's just like, oh, like people are given the permission to have whatever the experiences that they're supposed to have, not what I think. And that's again about not being outcome oriented. Like I don't care how it ends. I just know that it's going to end.
That's beautiful, man. Yeah, it brings me to the like right above me, right over my shoulder. I got a little monkey up there, and it's like you're talking, and I'm like, it sounds like parenthood, right? Like the amount of joyful playing that I get to do with my children is immense, and it's like sometimes that play gets too hard and it goes to tears, or sometimes there's just tears, or like the world just wants to burn in my child's mind, right? And like there could be all these a different array of emotions. And my tendency as someone brought up in this culture is like shift it always back to joy, try to take them away from the painful emotions, control, repress, push down those emotions. And part of my learning as a parent has been to sit with and just be in the presence of those emotions that are maybe a little less fun, and to just be okay with them, and to just hold space for them, and to be that like safe container for my children to be in those painful spaces,
Mm-hmm.
and let them resolve them on their own with me as a guide rather than controlling them.
Sometimes I think it's like it can be like, oh, this is just speculation. This isn't like I know anything. Actually, I should just say also everything that I say is my own speculation. I know absolutely zero. I'm just, it's only my own experiences. But that it's also can be a really fucking big ask of people to like be in the presence of grief, sorrow, sadness, and heartbreak when they don't have a relationship with it themselves, you know, like, or when we have like a culture that is like seen it as like a failure or wrong or less than, when, man, it's like the best feelings and the worst feelings are dance partners.
Yeah, that statement. So I'm just gonna share. So like when what you just shared there, I met my partner Isla on the dance floor. Our first dance was like I mean, it was such a beautiful, like unique and wonderful first interaction. And like we've been together for 4 years since then. She is one of my least favorite people to dance with and one of my most favorite people to dance with. Same person, same night. Right? And okay, so I had this as you were talking when I was going the same place as you, Matt, with like this sounds like the parenting journey of like holding space for the child in all of the emotional expressions, what I'm hearing from you, Kyle. And one of the things that is really lighting up in terms of my curiosity right now is it's so you've been doing this for how long? How long has infinite play been a thing for you?
Since like 2021. Yeah, beginning of 2021. But I mean, listen, it's like that's when it, like when I slapped a name on something, but it's been a lifetime of like tinkering and going and the complete other end to come all the way back around. But yeah, but then I also say, like, you know, I mean, I did stand-up comedy and I was a theater student and so many things before that like really, yeah. But yes, 2021 is when it was like, oh, like I'm doing something with people in a certain way that's becoming a thing.
And so you'd mentioned in the beginning that your capacity to hold certain experiences was like not as robust as it's become now.
Yeah.
And is that like in that same time frame? Like that's we're talking like 2021 to now?
Yeah.
So what I'm really curious about is in that time frame, as you've held these containers and gotten through these experiences, how has that rippled out in your own life?
Man, for some reason I felt like coming in here you guys were gonna like get to some of this, and this is very yeah, I mean, you say what rippled out, but I would also to kind of turn around and say like what had to like ripple back in, right? To like create that space. Really, really.
Yeah.
So like I say that, like, you know, I feel like this is probably archetypal, right? For people who are facilitators and guides or something, that like often like they've had to go to like their own kind of darkest places or you know, whatever, living deaths to like turn around and be able to have a certain capacity to like be with people. And that's that kind of relationship with heartbreak and grief and things that need to kind of, that you have to kind of go through. I don't know, that like give you that capacity.
Hell yeah.
And I would say that like when I first started Infinite Play, like my life looked a certain way. And then about almost 2 years ago now, I ended my relationship with my then wife. And that was the beginning of like a pretty dark period and full blown expression of like almost unrelenting, unavoidable like grief and heartbreak that went on for a long period of time. And I guess maybe in some ways is still kind of like we're still feeling like the outer reaches of those ripples now. But that experience played a massive role and going through it while doing Infinite Play at the same time. Like it definitely expanded my capacity. It definitely played this role in, I don't know, changing my relationship with like grief, changing my relationship with vulnerability, changing my relationship with joy, changing my relationship with kind of everything. And it could not be funneled into what I was doing and what I do artistically. And I would say that like my art is facilitating play. Like I see it as like an artistic endeavor in that way. And yeah, I would say that going through like a death of some kind, which is the death of a relationship, but also like then like a death of an ego and identity and having to confront all of that and everything that comes with that. That was just like, that was, I would say, like the really quick inflating without all the other parts of how I navigated that. But that was, I would say that was an integral part
Mm, feel that. My marriage ended in 2019. Thank you. I'm not.
Oh, no problem. Congratulations.
And with that, so as you're talking about like the death, the grief, like the relationship changes, like all of that was just lighting up memories that like continue, right? So I have my daughter will be 8 at the end of this month. And so her mom and I split 4 and some change years ago. And to this day, it was like last night, she was having a big expression emotionally, and like she's with me for the next few days and she wanted her mom, and she's dealing with her own sense of grief of my parents aren't together anymore. And like we've navigated it in a way that it feels like we're continuing to navigate it in a really solid way together, all 3 of us. And that grief experience is like it's so real, it's so visceral, and it's so raw. So thank you for sharing what you shared, because it helps me to feel those parts of myself, and I appreciate it.
Same to you. I appreciate you sharing about that. It's tough, man. I mean, it's like, yeah, like nothing prepares you for it. And also, it's just like we come from this like culture of immediacy, right? Where we think that everything needs to be like now. Everything is like Amazon Prime, right? Uh, like you need it like now. And like it's this, and it's the same with like heartbreak and grief. It's like, okay, well, it should like, yeah, like yeah, it should be over by now.
Something comes up for me, in my work, right? I'm working as an acupuncturist and doing this healing work, and in my own practice, like my own personal practice too, is like this stuff never leaves you. You're never done with it. You're like collecting these things on a shelf throughout your life, and they're there. They're just maybe not on the forefront. And to your point of this infinite play, we have to play with it and be okay with having to play with it. And it loses that immediacy, that like, oh, like just really gut wrenching, sensation that it can cause. But it's those scars will always be with us.
Right. And it's not a fixing, right? It's a
Yeah.
healing. And healing is more synonymous with change than like repairing or making something go back to the way it was.
It's never going to go back to the way it was. When I get
And
a cut and a scar, I crushed my leg in a forest game. I was at Evolve Move Plays Nature Retreat, Return to the Source. And I was sprinting through a set of ferns, and there was a rock on the other side of the ferns. My knee met that rock with such force, it did a blunt force trauma that cut my knee down to the tendon. And we glued it shut, and I, healed up from it. And now I have a really good scar right on my knee. And in that, it actually, like, I could feel that my knee didn't work the way it used to, because there was this scar tissue that had blocked it off. And after months and months of working with it and doing some zero form practice, I eventually felt the flow happen again in my knee. Right. And I was like, oh man. And I massage that thing all the time, and I work with it, I play with it. And it's like, it's doing pretty good now. But like, I have to play with it. I have to work it. And it will always be with me. Like, that scar's not going to go away. And so I have that physical example that I then draw a parallel to like your emotional, spiritual example, right? Your life circumstance, the same thing.
Yeah, it's like the same stories. Something has to like die or end for like something new to emerge, right? It's like I don't know. That's how change works. We have to like not be in a rush. I remember reading letters to a young poet, and there's like common themes that Rilke writes about in each letter, and one of the common themes is like this idea of patience. And for like change to happen, it's like it's patience. And like when a death happens, like it doesn't immediately turn to compost and then immediately turn to soil and then immediately have a seed planted in it and like a beautiful tree or flower growing out of it. It's like for something to die and then turn into compost takes a good amount of time. And then for the compost to turn into soil fucking takes crazy amount of time. Like this is not quick. And then once you plant the seed, it still needs time to like grow and like become something. Then I think it's part of like what I do in infinite play is like there's in a lot of like fitness and movement and scenes, There's like an immediacy, even just like putting hard, fast timestamps on things like, oh, we're going to do this for 2 minutes. We're going to do this for, we're going to do this for 30 seconds. We're going to do this for this. The class is an hour. And like, I'm believing more and more in like trying to allow the space for things to like take whatever they're going to take and respect endings.
So, what informs you on when to cut things off, when to end things in one of your containers that you create? Right? If it's so free form.
That's the big question, man. That's the like I'm sitting here because I told you guys I taught a facilitation seminar over the weekend, so I'm like sitting here with like the few things I managed to like write down to like be able to share with people. But I would say that's just listening. I say that play is like the thing that we use to play is our sensitivity, which I call our listening, right? Our capacity to listen, right? That's the thing that we use to play, but it's also the thing that is nourished through play. And when you're facilitating play, you're using the listening and you're nourishing the listening. But that's all it is. It's the same way that like, you and I have had lots of calls over the years. And as long as there aren't like, something extreme that happens, like we know when the conversation's is supposed to end without a stopwatch. We just know. It's like, because like you're like, oh, like my kids have woken up and it's time to go. Or we've just reached that point where it's like, oh, look, I think we're done. And that's just because we're practiced at that thing. And we have like we have that listening skill has been sharpened in that direction. And it's the same for this kind of like facilitation, I would say. Like it's just listening and like being there and like knowing, oh, like we've reached it. And that's subjective. It's not exact. There's no like you guys might do it the same thing, and then all of a sudden like you do something longer or shorter than I do, but it's just because the way you're listening says like, oh, well, that's where we're at. But it's a very intuitive thing, but everybody can relate to it. Everybody has conversations and knows when somebody in a contrived way ended it or started it, and when it happened just with like the proper kind of like chemistry or organic nature of it.
So right before we hopped on, you were sharing with me that you've been practicing jujitsu for a while and then you stopped.
Yeah.
What led you to that ending? What showed up for you that let you know it was time to stop for now?
So funny. It's so funny you asked that at that moment, because the reason I quit broadly is because I realized that like I said earlier, that like my practice is facilitating play. That's the place where I feel like I'm doing the thing that I believe in, care about, and matters to me in my existence at this point in that really kind of special, like artistic way. But when you're going through that, you start to realize things that are kind of like getting in the way of that. And also realizing the things that aren't serving that. And I realized that jujitsu has been like what's been like an obligation, it's been like an identity to keep going. Like I liked being the person who did jujitsu. But it occurred to me that like, man, like I'm sitting here like really pondering at length about sensitivity and listening, and that I have my own physical limitations that inhibit like my capacity to listen at its fullest. And I'm like, well, if play and facilitating and kind of holding a container is my practice, if it's the thing that I really love and the thing that I really do, well, I might need to aim a little more at that. So I was like, jujitsu from an identity perspective is not kind of like where I'm at, but also from a physical perspective is like not supporting some of my physical limitations. When I say physical limitations, like I mean like I want to be able to sit and have silence in my body so that like if you guys are speaking with me, that like I can listen and not feel certain discomforts that take me out of what's happening, for example. So yeah, I just decided, I was like, I need to stop doing jujitsu and I need to find some sort of physical practice that's going to support developing like a physical body that can do this thing that I'm asking it to do. So I started going to a yoga studio here in the city, and very quickly found like, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And not just because I feel it nice in my body, but like the way that jujitsu felt like an obligation for a really long time, where like the moment I knew I had to start getting ready to leave for class, I would feel tired. I'd be like, man, maybe I don't want to go, or like I got to the place where I was only going once or twice a week with like the yoga class. I'm like, every single day, no problem. I wake up, go. It's a 90-minute class, super fucking tough, but I like don't feel tired, feel invigorated. I feel excited to go. I'm never late because it's like I'm just, people use the word alignment, right? And they're like, oh, this is in alignment. Maybe I would go so far as to say like, oh, it's just very clearly like it just aligns right now to like where I'm at. So that's what kind of came up around the jujitsu. And I'm a huge fan, and some people like loving it. It's like right where they're at. Like none of the thing that I'm saying is like any ever like criticism of like anything that people love or find joy in or do or practice or anything. It's more just like everybody's different. And that's also why we shouldn't be preaching any like one exact modality or thing that's the like everybody needs this. What everybody needs for sure is relationships and the capacity to relate and to feed that capacity to relate, because that is like our magic. But like how we go about it is like so different.
A lot you just dropped there. One thing I'm trying to grab onto any of so many threads to grab onto. One little proverb comes to mind: one man's meat is another man's poison. And I have observed in my own life that it even is like that meat can become a poison for me, or that poison can become that meal for me. It just depends on where I'm at in my life.
Yeah, it's nicely put.
And something I was feeling into with what you were talking about is how often in my own life I had an idea of how I should be doing something, what I should be doing, and the amount of effort that I enacted to do that thing that I thought I should be doing. And yet my body, if I was listening to my body and what it was telling me to do, the amount of effort I would require, like the amount of energy it would require for me to do that thing that my body was telling me to do would be it would take very little effort. But instead I'm like, no, I need to be doing this thing. And that's like a mental, like, oh, this is what I want to look like. This is my identity. This is who I am. Like, no, that's not who I am. And a shift in my own perspective, it sounds like you've made this shift yourself, is to take a perspective then of, what do I need to be doing for my own growth, for my own development? What is my body telling me to do? What is the universe, whatever you want to call it, telling me to do? Mm-hmm. And when I hear you letting go of jujitsu, that's a perfect display of that maturation in your own perspective, your own development.
Yeah, I was someone sent me, there's this podcast, it's called like Jungian Life or something. It's like, like 3 Jungian psychoanalysts having conversations, and they did one episode on like vocation, which is different like term than what we deem vocation as, like vocational skills or something. That vocation is more closely aligned with like the word calling, like when you're aligned with like your calling and some of the things that are like emblematic of a calling. And yeah, I related to that in the sense that it speaks a little bit to this. When you're doing that thing that feels like it's in line with whatever your calling is, like it can be effortful, but it doesn't feel
but effortless at the same time.
Yes, you're okay with the effortfulness.
Yeah.
You're kind of welcoming of the effortfulness. You might even be welcoming of the frustration or the anger that comes with it.
Yeah.
But it's not like like energetically depleting or something, like maybe
to just speak to it. I'm starting my jujitsu journey. Like I started rolling with Elden here like a year ago, maybe a little longer. And I've continued my training here at a gym up here in Bellingham, Washington. And I love going. It's super fun. And like I got a little like ache and pain from, I screwed up my foot a couple weeks ago, and I like went the next week, and I probably shouldn't have, but I like it was like I was so happy to be there, and it didn't feel draining. And I'm like, I'm a tired parent right now. And I imagine there'll be a time when I reach a point much like you. And I'm like, not for me anymore. Not now.
Yeah. And like it to me, it's just like comes down to like a permission that people should be that people should have to change. People should have that permission. Like you're allowed to say no to things that you used to say yes to, and you're allowed to say yes to things that you used to say no to. And it's just like we're allowed to evolve. We're allowed to like come closer to our authentic desires. We're allowed to like have different tastes, and like there's a lot of kind of like commit to the thing and label yourself and hold on to that label. Don't just like stick it on with like the regular sticky label, like take it and then duct tape it onto you. So that it's really fucking hard to get off, Like
I
that.
see that as a parent with my children.
Mm-hmm.
They're always putting something on, trying something out. Like, my son's using his like little bow toy, and then he's like, I want to play with my trucks. Now I want to do this. Now I want to do that. And I'm like, no, no, no. Let's do this and let's get really good at it. That's my inclination from all the cultural programming that's been put onto me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something great about getting really good at something. It opens up a certain level of freedom in whatever you're doing. You can do a lot more with it. I think our own shared experience of our work with Ido Portal informed us of that, where you'd like almost obsessively dive into certain skills. Like, how good were you at handstands at the end of your training?
Oh, I almost had a
Ido.
one-arm handstand. Yeah.
And so, like, you could probably do all these things on your hands, right? Which is fucking rad.
Mm-hmm.
And
And it's a problem when your identity gets wrapped up in it.
yeah.
Like all of any of those things, totally, dude. I'm like, it's great if it's like something that you're like, you like to play with, or that and you can play seriously with it as long as you know that you're playing, But like when you don't know you're playing anymore and it's serious and it's your and who you are is wrapped up in those things that you can do, that's a tragedy. Then
And
it's
it
limited.
becomes exhausting. And it's,
Yeah.
from my medical perspective, like the work I do, I see it exhausting people.
Mm-hmm.
It's draining their life force, their energy, and then you get sick. It happened to me. I
Mm-hmm.
got Lyme disease, in like not just because of a tick bite, but because I was training 5 hours a day and was just exhausted by it. I wasn't getting nourished by it. It wasn't feeding me. I was just feeding the practice.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, I'm a broken record on this at this point, but it's why I believe that like what we're practicing and how we're practicing should be improving our relationships, and if it's not, we should be asking ourselves why. And that's a relationship with ourselves, that's a relationship with the people in our lives, and it's a relationship with the spaces that we move through and exist in. That's going to be different for everybody. It's going to be different for everyone, like what those are, but like that's what I mean, where it's like relationship is the thing. That's what should be. And I don't even necessarily, when I say better or improving or better at, it's like, it's not necessarily like a growth thing. It's a nourishing thing. It should be nourishing relationships and our capacity to have them, hold them, support them.
Deepening too.
So with that, what you just said, Kyle, like I'm really curious. Can you name some experiences or like life seasons that really led you to where you're at with that? Because I have like a very similar like feeling and thought, and I'm always curious like how we got there.
To the idea that like relationships are like the priority. Yeah. I mean, you know, I don't know, Matt, you're what? You're like 32, is that right?
I turned 34 a week ago.
Jesus, man.
I'm getting old.
Yeah. Yeah. Elden, how old are you?
I'll be 36 next month.
And how old are you, old man?
I'm almost 40, man. I'll be 40 this year.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, we're there. Yeah, I asked because I'm just trying to like think of like where kind of where I was at like wherever you guys are at in life in terms of like what I was thinking about. Like I don't know. I feel like maybe 7, 8 years ago is when I started like kind of being like going through those questions of like what is meaning, what is purpose, like what is that stuff, you know? Um, and you start reading a lot of things, right? And if you're lucky enough, there are people in your life who direct you towards some like really great things to ingest. And I feel like I was surrounded by enough people that got me to ingest some pretty interesting things that I had some like cool ideas about stuff, whether it was like things around like Taoism, Zen Buddhism, um, yeah, thoughts on like meditation and stuff. But it was, I wouldn't say it was like hands on so much as it was like theoretical in the sense that I was just reading books. But to bring it all the way back to the like the marriage ending and that death, that's when all that shit that you like read about, you're suddenly confronted with in the real way. You're confronted with like, oh shit, like here now I have to like live these things. You learn that almost like reading about anything like prepares you zero. You're like actually in some shit, you know? You're like, but I read about, mindfulness. Like, why can't I be fucking mindful? Like, why am I like having heart palpitations and an anxiety attack? And it's like, oh, because like reading about it means zero. You have to like get out there and like put your hands in it. So yeah, I mean, having to like live through some of those things and like really be clear about like what my values are, especially as you're like losing friends and facing like childhood, probably like little t traumas about like what have gone on in your life when you're in therapy and group therapy and plant medicine ceremonies. You're like being confronted with all this shit and you're like, oh, like what are the real things? Fortunately, like, I was facilitating infinite play and I'm really witnessing like the simplest fucking thing in life being like profoundly meaningful to like me and to the people that I'm like there with. And I'm like, oh wow. Yeah. It's just about communication. It's actually just about seeing and being seen. It's just about listening and being listened to. That's really what it is. That's all anyone wants. That's all anyone. That's the reason I'm here with you guys right now. It's exactly the reason because like it is so nourishing to like have like a conversation where like no one's trying to get anything just because like this is what we're doing. And that's a bit of it, I would say. And maybe to add just that, as Matt pointed out, I trained with Ido Portal for a long time and got a lot of beautiful gifts from that. But I think being deep in what for me was the full opposite end of the spectrum gave me like a strong via negativa. Like I almost had to like go through the like, well, fuck, I know that I don't want that. And I had to be in it for like a long time to be like, man, I really don't want that. Like it wasn't enough to just do like a weekend glimpse. I had to be like six,
Bro, you
7,
went so deep.
dude, 7 years,
I
seven
went
years,
deep. You went even deeper.
7 years. Yeah. And I'm grateful and not for like the skills and the tools. Although those are very cool, man, like, as I said, getting that like via negativa, super helpful. Like seeing the other side, seeing what I don't want and living it, experiencing it like that. It's a valuable tool. Not to say that that's what everybody has to do, but like for me, it was like, wow, that's helpful.
One thing that comes up is our shared experience and where we really deeply connected first.
Mm-hmm.
And when we connected most deeply, like initially in 2017 at the movement camp in Thailand.
Was it that long ago?
It was that long ago. And the fascinating thing about that is I was in the midst of my death at that time. I
Mm-hmm.
had just I got on the plane thinking I had Lyme disease. It hadn't been confirmed. I was like, I probably have Lyme disease. I'm going to get home from Thailand and I'm going to take a blood test and confirm that I have Lyme disease for sure. But this thing that's going on where every 2 weeks I can't walk, I can't move my arms, I can't do anything because of my joints are super inflamed. and I can almost not even think. Like, this is a problem that needs to be solved. And yeah, so that was where I was at when I was there. And my body held up throughout the training that we were at, where we're training for 7 days, super fucking hard, doing all sorts of activity. And I remember gravitating to a few people at that movement camp because I was like entering the inner circle of the cult, for lack of a better term, at that time. And then, like, in basically as I was arriving, I was like, yeah, I want no part of this. And I remember meeting Ito, and he's all excited to see me. And I told him, yeah, I actually have Lyme disease. And immediately there was like an energy pullback, right? And it was like, yeah, this is not like, there's not going to be a transfer now. We're just going to go our separate ways. And I remember connecting with you really deeply over that movement camp and having some really rich conversation with you. I had no way of knowing what was going to happen, but I was like, whatever is going to happen with this guy, I want to have a back seat. I want to watch. I want to stay connected, and I'm so happy I have. It's been really tremendous.
Well, I have to say, I admire your relentlessness to like maintain contact. I think that like it's something that's like lost a little bit. I think that like as people have become like, there's so many ways for people to be in contact. You know what I mean? Like we could get messages through Instagram, Facebook, iMessage, WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram. Like there's so many things, and it's like the more places you can get in contact with, like the less and less people are actually like really staying connected. Like most people just like don't even like pick up the phone, but like, you're somebody who's like, not only am I going to stay in contact with you, I'm going to just fucking call you. And I super appreciate that. Yeah, man. Like, I, as I said, I believe in like relationship. I believe in like communication. And I think that like, yeah, like everybody's trying to learn how to do that. But like, I appreciate that like you are relentless about it. Yeah. Like you don't settle for like someone just missing a call once. You're like, whatever, like I'm gonna call you like once a week for 4 weeks until we finally get on the phone. Tons of respect for that.
Thanks, man. Yeah,
He's
that's what it
good at it.
takes. That's
He's
what it
good
takes
at
in our
it.
busy lives, man. And that when you say that, it's an interesting one where like that's been a pattern for me in my life. And in the past, there'd be like baggage with that, right? You're trying to get a hold of someone and they can't get a hold of them, and you're like, oh, well, that feels bad, right?
Mhm.
And now it's just like, oh no, that's just like no harm, no foul, like cool. We'll just keep doing it. And it's been so great because you say that I've been relentless in getting a hold of you, but I feel like you've returned it in kind, and that's why we stay connected.
Dude, it is a joy, man. Yeah, it's hard to believe that it's been 6 years or 7 years, man. Crazy.
Y'all are cute.
Shut up.
No, I mean, for real though. So what you're bringing in here, I'm going to project onto everyone here and listening that we all have people in our lives who have faded out because there wasn't a continuation of the mutuality of communication and relationship. And have either of you read Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower?
No.
No.
It's a fantastic novel. I like fiction. I'm gonna recite a quote from the beginning of the book. All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change.
Beautiful.
Is one of my favorite quotes. And one of the things that I have found really challenging in my own relational life is to get in what I call right relationship with change within my relationships. Every relationship that I've had and continue to have, they change. And sometimes that change like grows us together. Sometimes it's parallel, sometimes it's apart. And that apart is something that has felt really hard for me to accept in certain circles and certain circumstances, especially in like my marriage that ended. It's like a really challenging like apartness to really accept, and then to learn how to like have like a good relationship as the marriage ended and we continue to co-parent a child. And so I'm actually very much appreciative of also you, Matt. I'm just going to call this out. Like, you have been a driving person in my life to maintain connection as well. And so I'm just like, you're kind of that guy. It's like a superpower that you have. And I'm also aware of how much energy that actually takes to do, whether it is fed or not. Like, it's an energetic output that I know some of us don't have the capacity to do that. Maybe we haven't grown that skill yet.
Or it's just not part of you. It might just be something that's just a part of me, just who I am, right? We're all different.
I would add, you were talking about change, that it is like a really wise friend said to me that how we practice and what we teach can reflect the changes that we want to see in the world. I believe that to like be the case of anything, like in my case, it's like a way of presenting movement, that it reflects a change that I want to see, and it's not just like in messaging, but like it's a real effort, So I think that, I don't know, maybe there's a lot of talk out there about certain things, values that people have, and then suddenly like we have to like live in this world and do something different that maybe goes against our values, and that's okay because we have to play a little bit. But I guess I'm curious about like the ways that we can present things, and what we present that might be through different mediums but end up like sending out other kind of ripples into the world.
So what are the changes that you want to see in the world?
Well, the reason I call infinite play finite and I call it infinite play is because there's this book called Finite and Infinite Games by James Carse. Have either of you read it?
No,
I've heard of it, but not read
I
it.
have heard of it though. Yes.
So yeah, I mean, a finite game is like a game that's played to win or with the intention of bringing it to a close, and an infinite game is one that's played to keep the play going. And we can look at that on like the micro level and go all the way out to like the macro level, that like, what does the world look like, what does the universe look like, playing to keep the play going, which is probably what is kind of happening. But then I said, not we, but like a collective we are doing our best to try to like defeat or control things. What does that look like? What could it look like if we were a little more open to the infinite game, in all the ways, not just in like things with parks and dancing and roughhousing and tennis balls. Like, can you practice those things in a place like that, and then walk out into the world and like some amount of like what you found in that world be brought with you. And I wonder a little bit that like some amount of that unwillingness to play with things, to play a little bit more of an infinite game, is that fear of surprise, and that malnourished tool, that organ of communication that allows us to like dance with surprise. So in my case, I'm like, through infinite play, there's a little bit of like, my wish is that like it means that we can walk into the world outside of like the park or the playground or whatever spaces that we're doing that in, and that a little bit of that like openness to surprise and that nourished ability to communicate can spread into some things. And it's not about like being like, I'm going to change the world. Why not send out a few ripples here and there? A friend of mine said that even like the smallest ripples on a lake like change the sand on the shore just a little bit. We all think we're supposed to like drop a tsunami or something, and that
I like that sand metaphor because it's bringing like a lot of what you just said is tickling things inside of me. And I'm a beach goer my whole life, and like sand's constantly moving by currents that you can't even see. It's like not even a ripple, it's like undercurrents and side currents, etc. And that feels, I mean, the ocean always feels like a metaphor for the sub and unconscious to me. And it's like, as you're creating these changes in like isolated containers, there's a change that is probably really hard to quantify, that has that carryover through like the subtleties of human. Yeah, really like that. Like what you're doing, like what you're putting out.
I like to think it's a special thing. At the end of the day, we're just playing, and like always accepting that too. Because it can also turn into, yeah, it can turn into something that can become outcome oriented very quickly when it's really just like, it has to also be like, there are these really magical things and then people are going to go off in the world and I don't know what it's going to be. Like the same way that like, I started like playing and doing things and it caused me to make my own uprooting, crazy life changes. And I didn't know that was going to happen and probably not the way I would have wanted it to go down, and if I were to like get to choose my gentle route around things, but like there's a little bit of, yeah, accepting that whatever, we're going to send ripples, but we don't know what they are. And I think that's also, I guess I would probably add, having experiences with like a number of people who are teachers and facilitators, that like it's super worth acknowledging, and people who gather people really might benefit from reflecting on that reality, that like what they present and how they teach is going to send ripples out into the world. And I don't think that that is something that is like really confronted, contended with, or reflected on also often with a lot of people who do have that really big responsibility of like gathering people, because not many people have that microphone. And if you're one of the few people who are like gifted or blessed or skilled with that, it is really worth reflecting on, because like whatever happens in that space is not limited to that space. It's going home with people, it's like going to work with people, it's going into people's communities in some way.
So within that, like, what are the types of questions, like internal inquiry and also like external reflections, that you're looking for to make sure that the impact that you're having is the impact that you want to have, and to keep yourself accountable to that?
I mean, I would definitely say that like I think it's super important to keep people close to me who are willing to like ask questions, not just like say yes to me. Yeah, that's great, good idea. You know what I mean? Not surrounded by like yes people, like people who are willing to like challenge or push back or ask hard questions. I keep people around me who have been around a lot longer, who have like just been on this planet a lot longer and are sitting me down and like taking me through things that I would have never done, like I've got people who like sit and do book clubs with me on books that like I would have never thought to read, so that I'm thinking about things that I would never go near, but that kind of keeps me in check. All of that probably surrounds the one word is just like humility. And I think that like there is a there is a movement in this world to have answers. There's a movement in this world to know. There's not a movement in this world to like from where I'm sitting, to like embrace mystery and to embrace I don't know. When we're forced to feel like we have answers, that's when we start kind of shutting out other things. It's like, no, I've committed to this answer. But yeah, committing the humility a little bit, and that I don't know is a really important piece. And that means like not having hard and fast rules, and that means also like practicing by the values that I'm presenting, like when I facilitate infinite play, like I'm doing infinite play. It would be funny if I was talking about surprise and uncertainty or presenting those things, but then I showed up with like this very specific syllabus and things to do and say. Like when I show up, I do the same thing that everybody else is doing. I'm just like playing it by ear and figuring it out and dancing with the moment and dancing with the people and seeing what's there. Those are the things that I'm thinking about, but that's also like my thing. I do think that there's something, feeling less committed to having certainties and answers and protocols. Just having good questions.
One of my mentors, who is, a woman of a more advanced age, she turned to me one time when she was really connected with things, and she said, it's a key to staying young: curiosity.
Okay.
How dreadfully boring is it to not be curious?
We're told to like have answers. We praise answers. We praise answers. We praise definitions. We praise like identities and titles. We don't praise the undefined in the same way or the romance in the same way, or the getting lost. We don't praise those things. But more often than not, like, we're doing that. We're in a lost, or we're in a surprise, or we're in something that's kind of undefined. And we're rarely actually in the thing that is like exactly what it is. And not to say that the defined doesn't have a place, but like, what happens when we're only looking at that? It's a huge limitation. It's a huge limitation. And yeah, more space for that
Well,
mystery.
what comes up to me there is on some level these definitions that we use, they're like shortcuts. They're heuristics, right? They're used so that we don't have to use our brains as much to think about, well, what is the complexity of this thing? It's like, oh, he's a this, she's a that. Like, we're doing this practice. Like, okay. And then you go into that mode. Okay, I'm enacting that protocol, right? When I schedule out a lot of my life now because I have immense demands on me from my professional life and my personal life. And I have these two children that we have to take care of. So we're like scheduling dinners and we're scheduling this and scheduling that, and everything's scheduled. And that actually then restricts the ability to play. Right. But then going into a deeper layer of it, like, can you play within those confinements that you put? Right. And that's kind of part of my practice that I'm required to do because I don't have the freedom. But these heuristics, these things that we use, they allow for us to focus on different things then, right? For our energy to be focused on different things. And if we use them in the wrong way, they can get us in trouble. They can, close things off, make us not allowed to see something that we otherwise may see.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, I'll say this. So since we just chatted about jujitsu, I have a jujitsu teacher who had said something really brilliant. He said the art of jujitsu is not the techniques; it's what happens in between the techniques, which I thought was beautiful. And speaking a little bit to what we're saying, right? The techniques don't matter much at all unless we have that space in between, which is like, I don't know, spirit. And then in the book Finite and Infinite Games, he says boundaries are to be played with, not within. Or infinite players play with boundaries, finite players play within boundaries. Yeah, that's what it is. And then another author said something very, very, very similar. This guy, Steven Nachmanovich, who wrote a book called Free Play, said techniques are there to be played with, not within. And that's to say that, like, it's acknowledging that these defined things exist and they have a place, but the thread that connects them is something very undefined. It's intuition, it's subjective experience, it's spirit, it's the artist, it's the child, it's the fucking whatever, But without nourishing that thing, there's not much there. And then we're just on YouTube, like, collecting moves and techniques and doing them one after another. And then you see people who just look all exactly the same. God, it's so beautiful. Like, doing something like Infinite Play where, like, people gather and you have, like, clowns and climbers and break dancers and grief workers and poets and, baseball players all playing together, and like they're developing their own unique conversations between them as couples or groups or whatever within or with the constraint laid out. And then you just don't see those defined things, even though some of their definitions emerge in certain moments of games. But what you just see is people sharing and communicating, because there is this tragedy, right? Where, like, we get so caught up on like whatever we're defined as that we can only interact with people who are defined by something that's the same or slightly close to it. Like, there was this guy who I know who practices like capital M movement, and he had like broken up with his girlfriend and he was pretty down about it, and he wanted to like meet someone else, and he said that he was struggling to connect with people who don't do, quote, the practice, meaning the movement practice. And I'm like, well, that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. Like, we should be doing things that like support us being able to connect with the whole population. Like, we have that capacity. There are people who have met, gotten married, had children, and stayed together for like decades and never spoke the same language. they could figure out how to communicate in other ways. Like we have that available to us. And like that's what's there. Resting under the surface if we're willing to like nourish it.
Deep, yo. No, I really like that. So I don't know if he's quoting somebody else, but my jujitsu teacher, Raul Castillo, has this saying that he likes to put in is practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. Mm-hmm. And then also the way that you practice anything, the way that you'll practice everything. And what part of I bring that in because what I heard you speaking to was like when we place limitations on who we are and who that person interacts with and how they interact, we automatically limit something. And it's not a bad thing, it's just a thing. And if we notice it, can we step back and then choose to expand our horizons again? Right. And I think like the problem is like, boundaries, like we all need boundaries. And then we also need our boundaries to be permeable to the right things. Right. From our biology to our mental to our relationships. If our boundaries aren't permeable to the right things, we don't grow.
And our boundaries are allowed to be dynamic. They're allowed to change.
Yeah.
Like we said earlier, like, yeah, like I'm allowed to like something now and not like it tomorrow. Like when we do things in infinite play, it's like we do a lot of stuff where we're like touching, putting our hands on because we're like dancing and roughhousing with each other. And it's like, hey, like if there's a way you prefer not to be touched, like you are free to let someone tell you that, or you're allowed to tell your partner that. And if you get that feedback, like honor it, and also know that like that is also allowed to change. You're not committed. You're not making that hard commitment right now to how you're supposed to be this entire time.
So Kyle, there's a question that is kind of been like marinating in the underneath things for me.
Like sous vide.
Yeah. It's just been like just sitting there, and I couldn't quite grasp it, and it's just come to the surface. Yes. And that question, and I'm going to try to form it. It's just bear with me here. In the practice of like that we both shared with Ido Portal, there was this very disciplined approach, this stick it out with something, right? For example, the handstand. It's like you're going to work 2 hours a day on handstands, 6 days a week for 3 years straight. You're going to get really fucking good at a handstand. And you do. And there's something that's pretty, I have an ability on my hands, even though I don't practice handstands. Like I'll play with a handstand every once in a while now because it's fun. But other than that, like I don't do it. And I'm still like, I have a freedom on my hands that I didn't have otherwise, right? There's this discipline that opens up worlds. I experience it also with like my acupuncture practice and this discipline to practice using certain sense functions, my smell, my sight, my ability to feel. These things have allowed me over years to develop a certain diagnostic skill that I would not have otherwise. And then I hear you talking about play, and I hear there's a discipline woven into it. Like there's a discipline, like you're disciplined and like committed to practicing play and to that listening, to playing with the world around you. Part of me, and maybe this is just my thinking brain, I don't know what it is, but it's like there's like a worry that pops up when I hear about this sort of perspective of, well, what if you just are like, it's like ADD, right? You're just bouncing from thing to thing and you never get good at anything because you're just not diving into a practice, right? Is that a worry for you in your own practice now? Is that something you've observed in your practice as a, like you're like truly becoming a practitioner of play, of playfulness, right? Is that something that happens? Is there like a lack of like grabbing onto something and really like deepening the practice in that? Apologies for the long-windedness, but I felt I needed to round it out.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I would say like in my own like relationship with like endings and holding ons, like I've had to confront that a little bit with like various movement things that I invested a lot of time in, right? Like how much I care about holding on to something and the stress that's come with feeling like a need to hold on to something like a handstand or something on the rings or something. So yeah, I've had to confront that in my own ways that asks like, well, what are my values really? And in my case, it means like, yeah, a certain kind of peace recently and like letting some things go. And as far as like the relationship to like discipline and kind of like getting good at something, I think that like when we're told to be good at something is different than when we have this authentic desire to be good at something. And I also think that like good is relative, and I think that I'm growing less and less interested in the need to be good at anything or to perpetuate any sort of message of needing to be good, because then it has this sinister potential to make people feel like they're only welcome to participate in something if they are good or on the route to being good. And that's where I get with something like a lot of movement things and fitness things, is that like it's always supposed to be improving in numbers, getting better, or more stripes on your belt, or like more moves or whatever, when or you know, more dance moves, more techniques. Like you need to know, like, you know, if you're going to do this kind of dance form, you need to know this stuff. If you're going to do this kind of fighting form, you need to know this stuff, you know, like etc. Whereas it can get in the way of the like, you're actually just enough right now, whoever you are, at whatever age, whatever physical capacities, you can dance in some way, for sure. Today, you can dance. Same goes for movement, and same goes for play fighting. Everyone today, right now, whatever age, there is a way. And I think that sometimes the pursuit and celebration of goodness of something can impact that very right now thing. And the pursuit of goodness is totally fine as long as it's played knowing that, for me, like, it doesn't impact my identity whether I get there or not. You know, that my identity is not wrapped up in the getting there or the being of that thing. I would then maybe just throw one more piece in, that the pursuit of anything has the potential to be lovely, but it also has the potential to like have us living in the future and not seeing what's happening right now. I'm super interested in letting people have some right now, like coming into a space where like you don't need to think about what you didn't do enough of before you came here today to be able to do this, and or what you need to practice in the future so that you can come here and do this better. You can actually come here and do this right now. Like, you're perfect. You're perfect right now. Discipline's cool, and I don't know exactly how to start to develop a proper relationship with it. And I think that culturally we have probably some things to confront to learn what discipline is and what it looks like. And I don't know. But
Discipline is sometimes not working.
Yeah. And I think that we have a twisted idea of what discipline is, because we come up with like grind culture, and we're in capitalism, and we're playing finite games.
We conflate discipline with obsession a lot.
Yes. And I think that discipline should be landing again with something that's supporting relationships. And I think that it means that it's landing somewhere in relationship to love, and not just isolated love, but like broader love. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
I want to jump in. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, there's this thing that's coming up. It's like, it's really strong as I'm listening. It's like, so there's an energy of, when I'm listening to you talk about play, and really like throughout the whole conversation around discipline as well, it's like, what happens if we frame our discipline around curiosity and inspiration? It's like, if we're constantly being disciplined with pursuing our curiosity and inspiration, like, we will get good at things, we will experience things, we will do things. And that curiosity and inspiration, like a child, like they know what they want to do, they're clear on it, and they don't care when it changes, when they get to choose, right? And we all started there at some point. And I feel like, you know, it's come up a couple of times in the conversation, like there is a indoctrination in our culture into like, at a certain point you need to choose what you're going to do, and you just need to go do that. And in that, inherently, for most of us, it's probably not always the case, but for most of us, I don't know any exceptions to this rule, but I'm going to leave the room for exceptions. I don't know everything. Like, at some point, that dedication to singularity suppresses and kills our inspiration and our curiosity. And then a part of us dies, and then like we're left with depression, like anxiety, alcoholism, drug addiction, like social disorders, etc. They all, like, I experience all of those emerging from that. And so what happens if a discipline, instead of being a singular focus on a skill, becomes I keep on showing up for my inspiration and curiosity? The question mark for me, I don't know.
And I would also maybe add that like showing up for the things that are necessities.
Yeah.
And that to me is like wrapped up in being disciplined to like supporting relationships and being with people and you know that's a little bit more. But yeah, you said it so well that like very quickly our passions can turn into obsessions because that's what we've been preached is like what we're supposed to do. I have this friend who has this really beautiful piece that he kind of co-wrote and recites once in a while, but he talks about love and that love is to be wild and disciplined and generous and kind. Sometimes I think that people can be disciplined but not generous, or they can be disciplined but not wild and kind. Maybe there's something in there, maybe that like discipline needs its like three brothers and sisters in there to like keep it in check. Because I'll tell you one thing, like when I was being deeply disciplined with my movement practice, I certainly wasn't wild.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I look back to the time when I was in that same movement cult and obsessed. It was obsession. It wasn't discipline. And I got into it for the right reasons. I went into it because I was amazed by what this man was doing with his body and like, wow, that's so cool. And like, how did this person do? There was curiosity, there was inspiration. I dove into it. It was fun. It was exhilarating. It was all these great things. And then it continues along this track and it's like, oh, well, this is what I'm doing. I wrapped up my identity in it. And then I'm just in it and I'm just walking this path of almost like drudgery every day, pushing the boulder up the mountain to have it roll back down the hill, right? And then start another day. And it took out so much of the adventure in my life because, I had to practice. I had to prepare for this thing that was like who I was, working for these goals that who the fuck cares if you can balance on one hand or squat amazing amounts of weights or do crazy tricks. It doesn't fucking matter. This weekend, I did something that I never would have done during that period of my life. I went out into the backcountry of the Washington mountains and took an avalanche certification and learned about how to avoid getting crushed by avalanches in the backcountry and in a backcountry ski tour. And it was like amazing. And I'm learning from this mountain guide who's become a dear friend of mine up here in Washington. And the wisdom that he's developed on the mountain was like, I felt like I was hanging out with a guru of some sort when I was out there. It's like, this is incredible. And I would have avoided that experience because it would have gotten in the way of my practice, 5 years ago.
I think about all the coffees that I didn't go have with people. All the times I said no to going and having a coffee and a chat because somehow I thought like the handstand was more important. And maybe depending on where you're at in your life, I'm not saying that it's not the thing to choose. But knowing that you have the choice is also really important. And I think that, yeah, we can become so kind of like obsessed that like we don't even know we have the choice. And that somehow like whatever we identify as makes us a better person. And like it's just not true. Like there are plenty of people who are black belts in jiu-jitsu who are very mean people. There are people who have been doing movement
or just not interesting people, kind of boring.
And there are people who have never done movement or anything in their entire life. And you're like, man, I could spend fucking days with this person. It's just like, I mean, I was down in Portugal and I got to hang out with this guy. He came to my workshop and then he took me out to some like remote part of Portugal and I stayed with his family like on a farm and his grandfather was there who grows olive trees to make olive oil and he doesn't speak any English. He was amazing to spend time with. That guy has never done a handstand in his life. He's never, gotten a guillotine on anybody. He's never done a down dog. Doesn't matter. I would have spent weeks just hanging out, seeing what this guy was about, and picking up whatever we could find a way to like bridge in communication because it was amazing. Yeah,
And you know what? I do have an interest though when I'm spending time with incredible people like that. And it's like, and then I would love to learn how to bridge the gap and get my hands on you and have you get your hands on me and like get me into a guillotine. What does that feel like?
well, and here's the thing. All of that has the potential to emerge if we're listening and we're just very good at verbal and nonverbal conversation. If we're good conversators, like we will find what's supposed to like emerge in that place. People are playing, if they're like playing, if they're having a good conversation, everything will emerge at different times. There'll be monologues, there will be volleys, there will be debates, there will be frustrations. And the same goes with like physical play. It's like if you and I are playing at different times, we're going to be dancing, and then we're going to be moving, and we're going to be interacting. We're going to not be interacting. You're going to be talking while I'm just like watching, and then sometimes we're going to be really fighting hard, and like having the potential for all of that to emerge authentically is like the sign of like a good conversation or a good movement conversation or a good interaction. All of that has its space. So who's to say that if I hung out with this guy that like we wouldn't find our way to start having these things that just emerge? But what I'm saying is that like that's really what it's about, creating more capacity for things to emerge because we've like nourished that listening organ.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really drawn me to your work, Kyle, is that what I see you doing is something that, you know, I think part of why I was so drawn to movement in the first place was that in our culture, we're not really an embodied culture. We're super fucking mental. We're so in our fucking heads all the goddamn time. And we don't like how often you just see someone on the street just like dancing. Like it happens from time to time, but you look at them and you're like, that person's fucking crazy. You know, like that's a frequent occurrence. Like we're not like we don't embody our emotions. We don't like connect with ourselves in a physical level to the degree that other cultures have or once have. And I see your work as almost like a healing of that, a trying to right the tide a little bit, getting more embodied, getting more connected with our physicality as well as there is particularly in relation with other people, in relation to like ourselves, not like I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to go lift weights, but it's like I'm going to like play in my body. I'm going to play with other bodies too. And we're going to do it in a way that doesn't have that, like, I'm going to try to choke you out, or I'm just going to dance with you in like a waltz, or whatever it is, or I'm doing contact improv and that's all I'm doing. And so it's a conversation that's it's a physical conversation rather than a verbal conversation. There's something that's so connective about that and so tremendous about that because it's like getting us out of our fucking brains, getting us into our bodies. And my work, I see so many problems, so many disease, even physical disease that is caused by people being in their brains, just stuck in their minds and the stories they formed around things. And so the more that we can drop into our bodies in all these different ways, I think it's such an amazing thing for our world. So like I see what you're doing is like it's ripples in that direction. That's fucking rad, man.
Thanks, man. Well, you know, we already texted about it, but I'm coming to Vancouver. I hope that there's a way that we can hang.
We will,
Yeah.
man.
Kyle, where can people find you?
My website is let'sinfiniteplay.com, and my Instagram is at kyle.e.fincham. That's it.
Appreciate you, man. It's really nice to meet you.
Tell me what events do you have going on in the not so distant future?
Doing lots of infinite play retreats. So next month in February, I'll do a day-long retreat that's here in New York City, here in Harlem. And then in March, we'll do a 3-day retreat just outside of the city in Westchester from March 8th through the 10th. And then the following month in April, I'm doing Infinite Play the 5th through the 10th in Costa Rica, which is pretty wild. Yeah, so just lots of retreats. Right now, my preferred way of kind of presenting things. And then I'm also doing various in-person and online educational things for people who are interested in how I go about facilitating Infinite Play, and all the stuff for that is also just on the website.
Thank you, Kyle. Great to connect with you. Thanks for popping on with us, brother.
If you're curious about our 9-month Initiate program, check out the link in the description.
When you're ready to begin your journey, visit elementalmovement.life